You are listening to the Bureau Chiefs with Michael Serapio, a primetime politics podcast from CPAC. Hello, everyone. I'm Michael Serapio. Welcome to the podcast. Well, the Prime Minister is one step closer to achieving a majority government, welcoming Lori Idlout into the Liberal caucus after the former NDP Member of Parliament for Nunavut crossed the floor, a move that was welcomed enthusiastically by the government caucus.
I think it's fantastic. Way to go, Lori, for crossing the line. We've been doing a lot of work, just cross-party lines, focusing on the North and what's important to her and to our ministry. So really happy to see this.
And I'm not surprised to see colleagues which are doing soul searching and say, I want to be at the decision table. I want to be there because, you know, if you just look at the polls, Canadians are behind the agenda we have put forward.
Is an extraordinary moment in which we are living, and it demonstrates again that the Liberal Party is a big tent party, that we're the centrist party, but we have people a little bit more on the right and a little bit more on the left, and that's how we get to the best policies for Canadians.
And Ms. Idlout's floor crossing does begin this week's episode of the Bureau Chiefs. Joining us right now are Robert Fife, the Ottawa Bureau Chief for the Globe and Mail, Tonda MacCharles, Ottawa Bureau Chief for the Toronto Star, and Joël-Denis Bellavance, Ottawa Bureau Chief for La Presse. Hello to all three of you.
Hey there.
Hi, Michael.
So, we begin here with Ms. Idlout. She's the fourth, opposition member of parliament to cross the floor, the first New Democrat. And with that in mind, her reasons versus the reasons of the former Conservatives who crossed over to the government side, what stands out for you in terms of her justification for doing this, Bob?
Well, I don't think there's any justification for most people crossing the floor, except in the cases of like Scott Bryson, where it was clearly a case of principle. He did not agree with the Harper Conservatives. He was a progressive Conservative, and he walked over to the Liberals. In this particular instance, she's justified it by saying that, they're going to do great things for the North, which is quite understandable. But, I mean, this is somebody who over the last year and just a few weeks ago was endorsing Avi Lewis, for heaven's sakes, who is pretty far to the left. And so I think there's a constituency in her area that will say, good, you did this for the community up north, and the government obviously can do a lot of good things for the North. But I just don't know how she can look herself in the mirror, to be honest.
Tonda, what do you make of the reasons?
Well, her reasons, while she cast them as very specific to her northern constituency and wanting to advance policy that she didn't feel she could at the NDP level, stand apart somewhat from the three Conservatives who went over before her, because she's not citing leadership issues. And those three Conservatives had not just, I think, issues around whether they could advance any agenda important to them and their constituents, but also I think it was pretty clear, even though only one really articulated it, the first, very well, there was leadership concerns with sort of internal caucus dynamics. So in that respect, they're slightly different. But look, I mean, the Liberal MPs that spoke to you there, or spoke to the reporters this week, kind of captured the way the Carney Liberals will market this as we are a broad-based appealing party. And, it's hard to actually argue that in the face of so many polls in the last, several days especially, that are showing much wider gaps between the government and the official opposition, and that they are drawing from different parties. Canadians seem to be, at this point, still on board with what Carney's planning and trying to do. And so I think that they read those polls too. I think all of these will be interesting and worth watching, whether or not they run again. Do they run as Liberals? If he gets his majority in the next couple of by-elections, that's something we'll have to track down the road. But it's not common for people to get re-elected floor crossers. Oftentimes they do step aside.
Yeah, absolutely. Joël-Denis?
Well, I think it speaks a lot about the status of the NDP. I think she was looking at the NDP and looking that this party was not going anywhere, becoming more and more irrelevant. Look, there's a leadership race. We barely talk about the leadership race in the NDP. I think she was seeing that her voice was not being heard, was speaking like parler dans le désert, speaking in a desert, nobody hears you. It's basically the same thing. And I think she wanted to make sure that what her constituency and her riding was needed could be better served in the government and not within the NDP. True enough, I mean, as Bob mentioned, there are some contradictions. Last week she was at an event supporting Alvy Lewis. Now she's standing up next to the Prime Minister. It's an odd situation, but that's politics. And up north, they do politics differently. There's less partisanship than there is here in the south of Canada. And so switching from the Liberals to the NDP or to Conservative to the Liberals, it's not as seen as a sort of an act of treason.
Not a taboo. It's not as much taboo.
Well, and it's also an area of the country where there's much more consensus building. So we know they were reaching out to her since essentially after the last election.
Yeah, she said she'd held discussions with them.
And the signal was she abstained on the budget vote, don't forget, in December.
Yep.
She could have helped marshal the votes to bring down the government back then, assuming the Conservatives would have gone along with it.
Yeah.
But, you know, she in abstaining supported the government's ability to survive another day.
And at that time, she pointed out some of the investment that the government was proposing in the north. So she already was walking in the direction of the Liberals then.
Yeah.
I will say, though, to the Prime Minister and the Liberal Party's messaging that they are a big tent party. And Canada is always governed better when we have big parties that we can all figure out, they come together and work out their differences. Jean Chrétien, during his time, he had probably 30 MPs who were really progressive conservatives or conservatives. They were in ridings like Peterborough and whatnot. And because the Conservative Party Progressive Conservative Party had split, and the Reform Party, and they came together, and we had a government that was, I think, very centrist because of the differences within the Liberal Party, and I think that worked really well.
And to pick up on Bob's points, when Mr. Chrétien was Prime Minister, he attracted also flower crossers from the Progressive Conservative, but also the NDP. Right. Angela Vautour from New Brunswick. She crossed the floor and she joined the Liberals.
There was a guy up north, too, Northern Ontario. Anyway.
Okay, that's a trivia drinking game post-podcast. But listen, you talked a little bit about the NDP leadership. I do wonder, how bad is this for the party? Reduced to 7 seats in the last election campaign, now down to 6 with this floor crossing, perhaps down to 5 if Alexandre Boulris actually leaves federal politics for Quebec provincial politics. How bad of a blow is this for the NDP?
Oh, it's a very serious blow for them. As Joël said, they're not getting any real coverage of the leadership race, and I think we all acknowledge that Avi Lewis is probably going to win the leadership race because he's raised more money, he's got a much better organization. But he's pretty far out there on the left. I mean, this is a guy who wants to nationalize grocery stores. I mean, God, you can't get your passport from the government, let alone let them run a grocery store. They tried it in the Soviet Union, and the lineups were pretty long.
We have been covering the leadership race quite a lot, actually.
I was going to say, so we here at CPAC. I'm just putting it out there.
The Star has been covering this leadership race, the candidates, the campaigns, the debates, the policy, and what's the future of the party. And so, but you ask what is the future of the party with its diminishing seats. I think that is a big question for this party to decide, and the next leader will define what that party looks like and how it proceeds going ahead. It's a huge challenge. Jagmeet Singh, Jack Layton, they had sort of a more broad, initially, energy and appeal, and were able to build up party memberships, votes, but no one's ever come close to the Layton success. And the Layton success was the function of a whole bunch of things at the time: a very weak Liberal Party and a weak Liberal leader, and a very strong Conservative Party under Stephen Harper. So, look, what lies ahead for the NDP? I think that whatever lies ahead for them, all of the candidates are much further to the left than we've recently seen NDP leaders be. And so that's where it's going.
Can I add something very quickly, though, because you say unique factors, and of course a unique factor in 2011 were the number of Quebec voters who actually voted for the NDP. And if Alexandre Boulris steps aside, that's it.
Yeah.
Because where else is there the NDP voice within the province of Quebec?
We've seen the NDP, I would say, call it a decade of misery in the 1990s.
Not provincially, though.
Exactly, but federally. The NDP federally had difficulties in 1990s. I think we're entering the same kind of period for the NDP, but not provincially.
Not provincially.
And to
You gotta
rebuild,
remember that.
Yeah, to rebuild, the NDP will have to rely on NDP allies in the province of Manitoba, Saskatchewan, and BC, or even Alberta, to rebuild. So they have also to rebrand, because the kind of policies that federal NDP is pushing forward is not even popular with NDP provincially in Manitoba and Alberta. So we'll have, and Alvy Lewis, I think, will probably make matter worse with the relationship with the provincial NDPs. I think.
But
so
I
it's going to be difficult.
I also wouldn't write them off, because there's a
No.
constituency there that he can market out. I mean, we have a left-wing support in this country, and Jagmeet Singh just didn't attract people. But Avi Lewis might be able to articulate a left-wing voice in contrast to Mark Carney, who's more centrist. And there might be a constituency there of people that will get the NDP back to around 17% in the upcoming election campaign. So I think there's real possibilities for the NDP to come back. I mean, we've seen this before, where they've had very dry periods with very bad leaders, but they've come back.
Yeah, I will add to that, though, because we know that affordability remains the number one issue amongst Canadians. But I was talking to Dan Arnold from Polera earlier this week, and he was talking about how the Liberals are gaining ground on Conservatives in Alberta. But when you break it up issue by issue, not only is affordability still number one, it was like 55% of respondents believe this government is doing a bad job on affordability. So that could be the place where Avi Lewis and, quite frankly, the Conservatives might make ground. So I think that's something to watch out for.
Well, also the Liberal government has given up on the environment. And there's a real opportunity for the NDP to come in as the voice on the environmental movement.
Yeah, fair enough. Listen, Lori Idlout, of course, crossing the floor. It took the oxygen out of another story that we were talking about when Parliament was away last week, and that has to do with the U.S. and Israeli strikes on Iran. Because as we know, the Prime Minister came out within hours, said he was supportive of the strikes, then went on days later to amend more than once his position on that support. And there was a take-note debate on Monday, which the Prime Minister did not attend. There were questions being asked the Prime Minister about what exactly was his position or justification for his position on Tuesday. Not much of an answer. And then Lori Idlout is announced on Wednesday, and those questions disappear. Have they disappeared completely? Are we now moving on from questions about this country's support for what's happening right now in Iran?
Well, look, I understood the spin I've got from the Carney people is that he came out very forcefully in support of the U.S.-Israeli action. Partly was that he was on a plane and he was going to Australia, and the Australians had already put out a very strong statement. He didn't want to be offside, but quickly realized that this is not going to fly with the Liberal caucus. It's not going to fly with Canadians. I mean, one of the proudest moments in this country is when Jean Chrétien said no to the war in Iraq. So he pulled back, readjusted his position, and frankly, even when he was talking about, if you read carefully what he said about, we can't rule out military action. It made perfect sense. He shouldn't have gotten involved in it, because he shouldn't speak about hypotheticals. But he was simply saying that we can't rule out anything if our other countries that we are supportive need Canadian military help. We'd have to do this. But he clearly said, Canadians are not going to support this war with Israel and the United States.
Tonda, is the issue over?
No, because it's one of the first big foreign policy blunders he's made, and it was a misstep last weekend. It misgauged Canadian public opinion. We, in a story today, just on the whole lifting of the U.S. lifting of Russian sanctions on oil, Carney and the other two leaders he was standing with, Germany and Norway, say they oppose that. But also, I think that the government must have been seeing the same polling that we've seen this week, which is that Canadians do not want unqualified support for the U.S. They very much want de-escalation. They view this as a major threat, a spreading war in that region. And I think Carney very quickly realized that. So his recalibration was not just, I was on a plane and I wasn't paying attention. It was very much, I think, once he hit the ground, you had, party statesmen coming out, opposition, his own MPs, his caucus. You know, it's not just the NDP that are a bunch of peaceniks. A lot of Canadians are a bunch of peaceniks. So he had to adjust. I think there was political imperative there, and to his credit, he did.
Yeah, I would also say that this is the first international faux pas on the part of Mr. Carney. He's, you know, gained a stature internationally because he's seen as the leader of the middle powers. And after the speech from Davos, this was not fitting with the kind of a position that he wanted to put Canada in. So that was a bit contradiction between what he said in Davos and what the very quick endorsement of what the United States and Israel are doing in Iran. Now, the consequences of this, I think, was, you know, I think he realized that he needed to correct his statements because he knew that there was some political damage done in his own party within Canada. When you see people like Lori Idlout coming out of and swinging at the Prime Minister the way he did, that's a clear sign, a clear warning that this was, you know, a misstep on the part.
And you know, part of the problem I see with this government is that they're run by technocrats. You've got Michael Serapio, who's an accomplished business person, but he's not great on politics. And Marc-André Blanchard, who's a corporate lawyer, and was with the CAS again. I know he's overseen election campaigns, but he's not a political animal. And in the Prime Minister's office, those are basically the three decision makers. You have Tom Pitfield, who's good at data stuff, but I don't think everybody's ever said Tom's got that political mind.
Like Jean Chrétien, for example.
Like Jean Chrétien or Jerry Butts, or, you know, I mean, he doesn't have anybody who are with him on that trip that could say, don't do this, because this will go badly with the Liberal Party and likely not to go very well with Canadians as well.
Or arguably people who were on that trip who may have said so, but he didn't listen to.
Or didn't listen to them. That's possible too.
Yeah, absolutely.
Sure.
Listen, the other, I think, issue that could become a bigger question for this government actually has to do with the story that La Presse broke this week, and this has to do with Camp Canada in Kuwait. We know that on March the 1st, the day after the U.S. began their strikes against Iran, you know, Israel and the U.S. against Iran on that day. On March the 1st, Iran started hitting American bases in the Middle East. Camp Canada is located within a U.S. military complex in Kuwait, and so gets caught in the crossfire. But we're only finding this out because of La Presse, and, you know, nearly 2 weeks after the conflict has begun. So I wonder how much of an issue this will be for the Carney government. You know, it broke. The question was being asked, but Mark Carney was already yesterday on his way to Yellowknife. How much of an issue is this, Bob?
Well, I think it's a big issue. I think this is a government that's far too preoccupied with secrecy, and decision-making is very small, and all of us are having difficulties trying to get information out of the PMO.
I was very happy to hear Mr. Carney say yesterday, I am not the only spokesperson for the government, you know, and refer to his defense minister to answer these very questions. Yeah. So.
And we saw that. I think we saw that with.
We're biting our tongue at that, but go ahead.
You know, well, I mean.
No, but Bob's right. They control. There's the lack of transparency flows from the tight control.
Yeah, and so it's frustrating for journalists because they have an obligation to tell Canadians what they're doing. First of all, I didn't even know we had a base in Kuwait anymore. I thought that was gone. But the fact of the matter that they kept that secret is just not acceptable. And I think the worst example was the Prime Minister failing to show up in the House of Commons when there was a debate on a war. There is absolutely no excuse for him not to appear in the House of Commons and answer the questions that you and I have been talking about right now. I think that's a real dereliction of duty.
Tonda?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think that the fact is not that we're all, you know, very happy that nobody was injured apparently, as far as we know, but that it took, you know, a La Presse reporter scanning satellite images to try and figure out, oh, this facility, and oh my goodness, to reveal it to Canadians is unacceptable. I mean, they might think it's trivia, no one was hurt, why do we need to? But all kinds of questions arise, you know, did Mr. Carney learn about that, you know, the day after he made his unqualified support for the U.S. action, learn about it on the March, so he made that statement on February 28th, this happens on March 1st, and then he's not speaking to reporters in this time for about 3 or 4 days in that window. Is that why? like what? Just explain what was the sequence, what happened, and what message did you convey to anybody? I don't know. I don't know what's so hard about that.
And when you ask questions to either the Prime Minister's office or the Defense Department or Anita Anand, the Foreign Affairs Minister, who answered the questions on this issue in the House of Commons, they keep saying that we can't reveal any details for security operation. Well,
the security operation's blown up.
Exactly. So it's a weak defense, and it's just to cover their missteps of not being transparent with Canadians, and that's unacceptable to me.
It's also not adequate to say, and we are not participating in anything. That's kind of beside the point.
Yeah,
exactly.
Essentially getting caught in the crossfire is a story in of itself.
And the fallout from this is that we're going to get suspicious about what they say about the war from now on. We'll have to double check everything that they say because they were not transparent on this file, and so we keep digging and getting more information. And if there are more issues that they don't reveal, then the suspicion will go and the confidence will be gone.
Yeah, okay. Listen, I have one last question before we're out of time, and this has to do with the fact that we didn't gather last week because Parliament wasn't sitting last week, but of course there was a significant few trips for the Prime Minister. Australia, yes, he spoke to the Australian Parliament, to Japan, but I want to focus in on the trip to India because for Canada, for this Prime Minister, yes, it's a trade and diplomatic mission. It's also about resetting a relationship at a time when Canada is looking for trade, but also dealing with the reality that India stands accused of interfering with the Indo community in this country, in the democratic process, and if not worse. What do you make of that trip?
Look, I think that was a significant misstep before the Iran stuff. When you had a very senior official in the Prime Minister's office who subsequently has been moved back to Foreign Affairs, I think that was already in the works though, saying that that they don't think that India is involved in foreign interference or transnational repression in this country. It was laughed out, heads shaking from CSIS people, from national security advisors like Jody Thomas. Everybody was saying that's just ridiculous. And in fact, Global News had a story a few days before that person made that statement where there was a threat against a Canadian Sikh leader in which they believed the Indian government was behind. And it took days for the government to finally get some kind of a message out there, which is basically, we don't agree with the comments of this senior government official. It was really badly handled. And part of the thing is, I guess he didn't want to offend Prime Minister Modi when he was there, and he did not have a news conference at all with the reporters until he left India. So that's another black mark on the Prime Minister. You got to step up to the plate and answer these kind of questions.
Tonda?
I mean, to the extent that Mr. Carney wants to and is aiming to reset the agenda with India on a trade forward, economy forward thing, this is a massive, it's the elephant in the room for Canadians, right? Because of his predecessor in the House of Commons told us there were credible allegations that India was involved. So, to then sort of turn an eye away from that, it's unavoidable. He's going to have to face questions. I think interestingly, it's kind of refocused. They have to pay attention to it. I think you're right. They mishandled the initial briefing going into there and setting the stage for the visit. But those questions dogged him every step of the way. And it heightened focus, I think, on, well, what is the status of things and what is really going on? And I think it puts in check a bit the government's urge to just do business come what may. They have to think about these things. Every Prime Minister, from Stephen Harper on down, John Chrétien, has had to face that question. What do you do with rights abuses by foreign governments? Do you ignore them? Do you do as Xi Jinping has apparently told him, and Mr. Carney spoke positively about it in their conversation while he was in Australia. He said, they don't want us to raise things in public that we have objections to. And that seems to work for him, but it doesn't work for all Canadians. Yeah. Canadians actually do want to see their values actually represented.
And spoken about by their political leaders.
Their leaders.
Yeah, I think as for the sort of the briefing that we got before Mr. Carney left, I think they wanted to play nice, set up the piece so that there would be a nice visit beginning from the beginning till the end. But at the end of the day, the government wants to negotiate a free trade deal, and this could have been seen as a major roadblock for that objective to try to increase trade with India. The government has big ambitions, trying to double our exportations outside of the U.S. market. So it starts with what? With countries like China and India, the biggest, economies, the two biggest economies beside the U.S. And you need to play nice. That's the kind of attitude the government has. But sooner or later, this is catching up to them. You can't ignore those issues, otherwise you do it at your own peril.
Well, we'll see again. Parliament is not here next week, so we'll see what the fallout to all of this is when Parliament does get back. But before we're done today, we're going to switch over to, I love that Bob's already smiling, to our yays and our nays of the week.
Okay, my yays is to the government for providing $500 million for pure scientific research, everything from quantum technology to marine drones that can be used not for military purposes but for scientific research. Canada under Jean Chrétien had really cared an awful lot about pure research, partly driven by his brother who was a doctor.
Yep.
And we kind of fell away from that, and the fact that this government is putting money again into research like that, I say hats off. My nay is, I've already expressed it, which is the Prime Minister failing to show up in the House of Commons to debate a very significant issue of a war that's being broken out in Iran that's just going to cause great havoc for the global economy and Canada as well.
Yeah, and the war in Ukraine, given what's now going to happen with Russian oil. Tonda.
Well, my yay goes to Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre for venturing beyond Canada's shores to pitch new ideas, to propose some solutions he thinks might work, whether you agree with them or not, or whether the timing seems right or not. I think that it's great for him to try and forge new alliances with people around the world in support of the goal of, trying to work with Carney and see everybody through the economic shocks right now. And so kudos to him for, that's a big effort, and the speeches were substantive, and he's so far seems to be following up on his promise to talk to more people, and that's I think, a good step for the party. My nay is, we've already talked about it, my nay is the lack of transparency around the Camp Canada bombing. I think that there's really no defense of it. I haven't heard one that works.
Okay. Well, I'll be repeating what my colleague said. My yay goes to Mr. Poilievre. In French, there is a good expression, les voyages forment la jeunesse. So when you're traveling, you get experience, and that's what Mr. Poilievre is doing. And I think it's a bit of a reversal in his position, because he used to slam Mr. Carney for traveling so much. Now he's doing the same thing for the same objective, being seen as a future Prime Minister, possibly Prime Minister in waiting. So good for him. He's going to talk to people, raise his stature, probably learn new things from outside. And my nays goes to Mr. Carney. Same reason as Bob mentioned, showing some contempt for Parliament. Parliament is a key institution in Canada and our democracy. You need to respect it, and it comes, the very first person that has to do it is the Prime Minister.
Okay, fair enough. Okay, Parliament, again, not sitting next week, but still good to know what you guys are keeping an eye on.
Well, I want to see when Dominic LeBlanc is going to get an agreement with the Americans so we can begin negotiations on CUSMA, because the Americans have done it with the Mexicans. In fact, next week they'll be meeting with them. We still have not heard anything from the Americans or the Canadians on whether this is when we are going to actually sit down and start talking to them.
Okay.
And I'll be watching what Mr. Poilievre is saying in New York when he has his big speech concluding his U.S. visit. So that's Thursday, I believe, in New York.
Okay. Things to be watching out for. But listen, again, Province not here next week, so we're not next week, but we do return 2 weeks after. But for now, that is the Bureau Chiefs, our episode for this week. Bob, Tonda, JD, thank you very much for the episode. And you have been listening to the Bureau Chiefs with Michael Serapio, Primetime Politics Podcast from CPAC.